Just start now. Yeah, people.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, kia ora koutou katoa. No mai haere mai. Welcome to our 40th anniversary webinar with special guest Margaret Mutu. I'm co-hosting tonight with Tim Howard and Yeta de Jong from Network Waitangi Whangārei. And we'll hand over to Tim to start us with a karakia. Kia ora, Tim.
Kia ora mai tāu. Hei karakia tēnei. Rapua, rapua te wānanga. Wānanga ki utu, wānanga ki tai, wānanga ki te tikanga. Tikanga anō ko tikanga arangi ki a hua te tikanga, ki papoki te mahara o homi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnei te mihi atu ki ngā mana, ki ngā reo o te tai tukarau, puta no te motu, tēnei te mihi atu ki ngā karanga maha, tēnei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ka huninga whakaaro ki a rātou māku o haere ki tua o te rai. Ki a rātou kua whawhai mo te mana motu hake o ngā iwi me ngā hapu o te motu. Ka huninga whakaaro ki a matua Moana Jackson. Me e tahi atu kua haere ki tua. Nō reira, rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou ki te kanohi ora o te ao ko hatu, tēnei te mihi atu, hurino ki te whare, tēnei rā tātou katoa. Normally, we addressing our thoughts as Network Waitangi to the non-Māori side of the treaty. But tonight is special because we have a special welcome to Professor Margaret Mutu, who speaks out of a tangata whenua perspective and out of a rich history with Matike Mai and many other activities beforehand. So ngā mihi ki a koe e te mare kura, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe. No mai ki rungi tēnei kaupapa tēnei atamira, tēnei te mihi atu. Hurino ki te whare, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Pass over to Yeta.
Kia ora, Tim, and kia ora tātou. Just want to tautoko Tim's words on how much of an honour it is to have Whai Margaret Mutu presenting to us this evening. I'm just here to do the housekeeping tonight. So Whai Margaret will present her kōrero for 40 to 45 minutes, but really as long as as she likes. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So feel free to add these at any stage, and you can also upvote questions. And we won't be answering them during the kōrero, so just add them to the Q&A and upvote them. So unfortunately we won't have time to have raised hands and things, but we will try and get to as many questions as possible. So just try and keep one topic per question. And just to let you know that the session's being recorded and we will be putting it on our YouTube channel later. So that other people can also have a chance to hear what we speak about this evening. I'll just read out the questions just to save a bit of time. So that's all from me, and I'm just going to pass you on to Moya Armstrong to speak on behalf of Network Waitangi Whangārei.
Yeah, so thanks Tim and Yeta, thanks for that. And so just, you know, what are we commemorating? So I'm just going to give a short explanation for those of you who are unfamiliar with our history before we hear from Margaret, since it's our birthday party. So Project Waitangi was initiated in 1985 by the Reverends Bob Scott and Sir Paul Reeves to educate non-Māori about the treaty in the lead up to the 150th anniversary of the signing in 1990. Why? Because it is said that Māori never forgot, but Pākehā never knew. Of course, this was not the beginning of Pākehā activism in the 1900s. In the 1950s, Ruth Ross did her research on the Māori text, and Dick Scott wrote about parihaka. In 1959, the Communist Party instigated the Citizens All Black Tour Association in response to South Africa's ban on Māori players. They collected an amazing 150,000 signatures on the No Māoris, No Tour petition. We mihi to the groups that followed, Care and Heart, and the many other groups that began their work in the 70s and 80s, notably the Waitangi Action Committee. The leaders of our education movement, Mitzi Nian, Joan MacDonald and Joan Cook, worked closely with Tita Whai Harawira and others on the committee. We acknowledge the founding members of Project Waitangi in Whangārei, the Reverends Joan and Russ Cook, Don Ross, Steve Bayliss and Janine Boyd, and of course Pat and Les Gray, who are still active members. Actually, they're hyperactive members. Like many other groups, this was a powerful alliance of church people, communists, feminists, unionists, artists and educators. Pat had previously been a member of Women Against Racism, and Joan and Russ had been part of the Anglican Church's treaty-based constitutional change process. That was an amazing process for so far back in the day. The Whangarei Community Arts Council umbrellaed the group. After 1990, Project Waitangi morphed into Network Waitangi with regionally autonomous groups that met annually at the Pākehā and Tauiwi anti-racism and treaty workers gatherings. Now, there are a plethora of differently named rōpū, both virtual and place-based, and we salute you all. The sheer diversity and growth in our movement is astonishing and gratifying, and hopefully the combined work is reaching out to a critical mass of New Zealanders. Thanks to the Coalition Government, our active membership has been boosted considerably. We particularly acknowledge our sister group, Network Waitangi Ōtautahi, Catherine Peat and crew, and know that Margaret has worked closely with them on the wording of Article 1. As Margaret needs no introduction, I would like to preface her presentation only with her elegant interpretation of Article 1 itself. The rangatira of the Confederation and all the other rangatira who have not joined that Confederation delegate kāwanatanga to the Queen of England forever for lands entrusted to Pākehā and other non-Māori. Tēnā koe, Margaret, for this and for all your work on Matike Mai. And so we just very much hope that you'll unmute your microphone and start the presentation when you're ready. And I know that that is about the shared screen and all of that. So over to you.
I'll just, so ka nui ngā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. Te mea tuatahi me mihi atu ki a koe Tim. Nau I hakapuare te huarahi ki te Rangarawa ni reira tēnā rā koe. Tēnā rā koe Moia, te roa koe e mahi ana I tēnei mahi no reira aku mihi atu ki a koutou. Tautoko ngia ana ngā mihi ki a rātou kua mene atu ki te pō no reira haere, haere, oki oki atu. Hoki mai ki a tātou te honga ora, no reira koe nei te mihi atu o Ngāti Kahu, ki a koutou katoa I tēnei wā, ka nui aku mihi ki a tātou, kia ora mai anō tātou katoa. Okay, so thank you very much for asking me to talk to you. I've always admired the work of Network Waitangi and always sort of kept an eye in the background on what you were doing. So I just want to congratulate you on your 40th birthday. It's great to have you there. So you've asked me to talk about constitutional transformation and the work of Matike Mai Aotearoa. On this slide, you'll see a different logo from what you're used to seeing. And this is our new logo that the rangatahi have done for us, or the current rangatahi have done for us. Now, I'm going to try and go to the second slide. I can see that. Can you see that second slide?
Yep.
All right. So what I want to cover tonight in terms of constitutional transformation, first of all, this logo you see here is the logo that we used for quite a few years. And this logo represents the country in balance. both environmentally and in terms of the people as well. But I'll talk to you about the report that was authored mainly by Moana Jackson that came out in 2016, where the aim of that constitutional transformation is to restore the balance between Māori and the Crown. And it's a constitution that will be based on tikanga, and tikanga meaning law, not these sort of translations you get about protocol and ways of doing things. Our tikanga is our legal system. And then the 1835 He Whakaputanga, the Declaration, the 1840 Tiriti o Waitangi, and the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But before I go on and talk about the report of Matike Mai Aotearoa, I just want to step through He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti before I get there. And then also just have a brief look at why we're having to do this work in the first place. And what we're aiming for here is that all peoples will have a respected constitutional place in this country, that all New Zealanders will prosper and celebrate our heritage instead of a select few, and to normalise te ao Māori for this country. It is actually a Māori country, but you wouldn't know it. Okay, next one, please. So in terms of He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga o Nu Tireni of 1835, it is a declaration that Rangatiratanga, and Rangatiratanga is the exercise of mana, and mana, the closest translation I've been able to get for it, is the ultimate and paramount power and authority derived originally from the gods. So it's about power and authority, and certainly the overarching power and authority. So Rangatiratanga is the exercise of that power and authority. And that resides with the tino rangatira, the head leaders of each of the hapu, and will never be given to anyone else. In other words, the sovereignty of Aotearoa New Zealand lies with the leaders of the Māori nations throughout the country. It never has been and never will be relinquished. And there was a question in the chat about it was signed by a few hapu in the north, and yet the narrative appears to be wanted to include it in the treaty. I will come to that when I talk about Te Tiriti. But in terms of Busby signing it, it was the signatories to He Whakaputanga are the rangatira. It wasn't signed up to by the British at all. They simply acknowledged it subsequently after the English version, translation, whatever, it wasn't a very good translation, was sent to Britain. The next one, please. So following after that, you had Te Tiriti o Waitangi, because the declaration was a constitutional declaration of the makeup of the country. That's He Whakaputanga. And it was meant to tell the British visitors that we had here at the time, these are the rules of the country. But they didn't abide by them. So in 1840, there had to be a treaty that is an addendum to He Whakaputanga. Now, I understand that the He Whakaputanga was signed almost entirely by rangatira from the north. It included Te Whero, who became Pōtatou Te Whero, from Ngāti Mahuta, and that, of course, became Tainui, and then also by Ngāti Kahu by Hāpuku. But the rest of the country, you're absolutely right, the rest of the country did not, although these days I have to say it has been far better known throughout the country by Māori throughout the country than it has been until we were doing this work on constitutional transformation. So He Whakaputanga set out the constitutional base. Te Tiriti was added onto that in order to allow British immigration into this country. But that immigration, and that was an invitation for Pākehā to come and stay and live with us. But it was conditional on Queen Victoria using that kāwanatanga mechanism that was devolved to her as a self-management tool over Pākehā, because what she needed to do was to keep control of and stop the lawlessness of Pākehā. That was the problem that the rangatira were asking to have addressed in Te Tiriti, and also to protect Māori from that lawlessness. But the key thing about Te Tiriti is that it is a treaty of peace and friendship between two sovereign nations. Okay, haere tonu. So He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti are the founding constitutional documents of Aotearoa, New Zealand. They are the country's written constitution. But because the Crown ignores and violates them, constitutional transformation is required to rebalance the country on these foundations. Haere tonu. So what we need to bear in mind, and what we discuss so much when we're on our marae and in our wānanga, is what would Aotearoa New Zealand look like if Te Tiriti was given effect? And from the discussions that I've had over many years over this, these are the things that fall out of it. All peoples will have a respected constitutional place. The notion that some people are marginalised in this country is just not on in terms of tikanga, where you must include everybody. The next one, all New Zealanders will achieve their potential so that all prosper and celebrate our heritage, whatever your heritage might be. That Māori knowledge and law, our mātauranga and our tikanga, is upheld as the country's primary knowledge, legal and constitutional base. We've been here for well over 1,000 years, accumulated a massive knowledge base about this country, set in place a legal system to cope with the realities of this country, and therefore being able to put in a constitutional base. I'm going to talk to you when we get further on about what a constitution is. Pākehā and other knowledge bases that come in with people who are coming to the country are valued and fully available for all. And around that, one of the things that my tupuna were always, that they were very inquisitive, and they always wanted to know how others saw the world. And they always invited that sort of expanding of knowledge bases. So that's why I do hear fear in parts of the community that Māori things will push other things out. It's not the nature of Māori to do that. We're always fascinated by other people's knowledge bases. The thing down here, Pākehā and others would make their own decisions for themselves about their own lives in accordance with their cultures. You can't live in somebody else's culture that you don't know about. You're always going to struggle. So what common sense would say to you, you have to grow up in somebody else's culture? But that culture must be consistent with tikanga, because that is the law of the land. And this white supremacy that bedevils us in this country and the racism that comes out of it simply would not exist if the treaty was given effect. So what actually happened? So next one down, this one's got several bullet points along down it. So 3 months after the signing of Te Tiriti, Hobson quite deliberately and fraudulently claimed that the treaty was the English language Treaty of Waitangi that nobody agreed to, that was not discussed at all anywhere in the country. And yet he claimed that was the treaty. And the reason he claimed that was the treaty was because it said that Māori had ceded sovereignty to the Crown. That was never included. Māori did ask, particularly at Waitangi, they asked whether that was what the government was trying, what the governor, what Hobson was trying to do. And the missionaries denied it, absolutely. And there was actually, in all of the record that's there about the discussion that went on at Waitangi, there's very little, and virtually no discussion about the notion of sovereignty at all in those discussions. So Hobson was being deliberately disingenuous when he claimed that the English language treaty was the treaty. But what was more dangerous was that on, I can't remember what day, in May of 1840, he issued a proclamation in English declaring British sovereignty over New Zealand. And that was based on the doctrine of discovery. And now the doctrine of discovery, that's what we call it these days, but it's the notion that white Christians are superior to all other peoples and that they have a right to go into their countries, literally discover countries, take over all the resources, either eliminate or enslave the people. And this comes out of a doctrine that was developed in the 1500s in Europe and in particular in the Vatican. And that, of course, is what gives rise to your white supremacy. He issued that declaration, that proclamation, and the damage that that did is that all Pākehā law in New Zealand, including all the institutions it established, Parliament, the courts, public service, all the things that go with the public service, all of those things rely on the illegitimate proclamation for their authority. Many impoverished Pākehā, mostly fleeing harsh British conditions, flooded into the country. We looked after them, and in Ngāti Kahu, our hapu talk about the various ones that they looked after when they came with absolutely nothing but their shirts on their back. So many of them then, after we'd looked after them, agitated for the Crown to strip us of our lands and resources so that they could have them all for themselves. And the detail of that is contained in the reports of the Waitangi Tribunal. And it's stunning the extent that was gone to strip us of everything. And then they tried to wipe us out. So before Pākehā arrived, the population would have been several hundreds of thousands of Māori. By the beginning of the 1900s, we were down to 42,000. And the thing that wiped us out the most was the introduced British diseases. They were absolutely devastating for us, just as they are to this day. But they were a lot worse back there in the 1800s when we had absolutely no resistance to them. There was also warfare, but it was the diseases that did the most damage. The next bullet point, please. The result is we have been marginalised, deprived and oppressed. In our own land, denied our tino Rangatiratanga, subjected to atrocious acts of white supremacy, as our guests became wealthy, prosperous and privileged from our lands and resources. The next one. The Crown was and is still an incurably recidivist criminal. And I've said this repeatedly to the Crown, and they can't get their heads around what I mean. A lot of what they did was, 1, illegal, 2, it was a crime, and 3, they keep doing it. So, incurably recidivist criminal who refuses to give up their ill-gotten gains. They refuse to give back our lands. They refuse to just give back what they stole. And to see the results of that sort of oppression, all you need to do is look at the socio-economic statistics, and we'll have a look at these briefly now in the next slide. So these statistics I've gathered here come to us mainly out of the 2023 census, and I've given you two sides of the table here, one for Māori, and the other side is for the general population. So Māori are included in that general population in the figures there. So we are nearly 1 million in number here in the 2023 census, 19.6% of the population, but there's over 170,000 of us in Australia. And we go there, our whānau go there to escape the racism in this country, to be able to get a job and to be paid properly. A lot of them earn a good income and then come home. So By comparison, 68% of the population is European, 17% is Asian, 9% is Pacific. Those numbers all add up to more than 100 because you have dual ethnicities being shared. For Māori, back on the left-hand side, 85% of us live in the urban areas, having been forced out of our homelands, back home with where we belong in our whānau and hapu ancestral lands. 19% of Māori still speak Māori. In the general population, 5% speak Māori. I do get encouraged as I hear more and more of this. This, of course, my background is in languages and linguistics, so I really encourage everybody to learn Māori. It is your right as a resident, a citizen of this country. You have an absolute right to be able to speak Māori in this country. The median age, we're a very young population, Māori, 27.2 years, where the general population is 38.1 years. In terms of education, a bachelor's or higher degree, 21% of Māori have a bachelor's or higher degree, 37% of the general population. This next statistic is a shameful statistic. The median net wealth, the measure in dollar terms of what you own, 42,000 is the median net wealth of Māori. It's 397,000 for the general population. Unemployment figures are always much higher for Māori than the rest of the population at the moment, 9.1%, and where the general population of 4.6%. Every now and then I get to see the Pākehā figures here, because this one I've given you here is the general population. And the Māori figure is always at least 2 or 3 times higher than the Pākehā unemployment rate. Life expectancy for a Māori male is about 73 years, whereas for the general population, it's 81 years. And then for women, Māori women, 77 years, the general population, 85 years. Again, the Pākehā figures, when I can get hold of them, I couldn't get them for this one, they're usually higher again. But it's this prison population one that is really bad. And this is what colonizers do. When they can't control the Indigenous people, they just imprison them. And the imprisonment rates, particularly in Australia, Canada, the United States, of Indigenous people is horrifically high. In this country, perhaps the highest incarceration rates in the world of Indigenous people. We are 19.6% of the population, but 54% of the prison population. For the women in jail, Māori make up 67% of the women in jail. Have a look at the European figures that are hiding behind the yellow. European make up 30% of the population, prison population. The women, Pākehā women in prisons are 31%. It is a shameful statistic, that one. But this is the impact of British colonization. This is what white supremacy and racism has done to Māori. Let's have a go to the next one. So what is the government's role and what are its international obligations? New Zealand governments have been pressured by the United Nations bodies to adhere to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That declaration, I'm not going to go into the details of it other than to say to you that it's 45 articles that are a blueprint for how to implement Te Tiriti or Waitangi. And I can say that because the chairperson of the first committee that drafted the first draft of this declaration was Moana Jackson, working with a whole lot of other Indigenous leaders. They drafted this. Moana became very disappointed with the way the New Zealand government kept agitating to claw back the different articles that had been drafted, to the point that Moana actually resigned from that committee when New Zealand, Canada, United States, and Australia tried to completely destroy that declaration. However, that declaration to this day is still better than what we have in this country, which is why we still adhere to it. But the thing is, it requires the rejection of the doctrine of discovery and white supremacy. I'm part of National Iwi Chairs Forum, and we have been asking governments for several years now to please reject or repudiate the doctrine of discovery, and they flatly refuse to do so. But we did get to a point under Jacinda Ardern's government in between 2020 and 2022, where the government did work with National Iwi Chairs Forum and the Human Rights Commission towards a national plan of action to implement the declaration. And that was under the leadership of Nanaia Mahuta. And there was very strong support from the United Nations body on this, and the racism in this country, from my observation of it, is most deeply entrenched in the public service. Public servants, as soon as they saw what was going on, as soon as they saw what Nanaia was trying to do to have a national plan of action, they worked to undermine it. Now, I can't say this for all of the public service. Some of the public service were exceptionally good in helping us to draw this up, but others were absolutely determined to undermine it. And when they couldn't do it from within the committee who was drawing it up, they went to the ACT Party and to other right-wing people, fomented racist attacks. And you will recall the He Puapua report. All that report did was say, this is how you go about drawing up a national plan of action. Well, they demonized that report, and that was your public service doing that. And in October 2022, the government withdrew from that, citing racist attacks on Māori ministers. And I didn't know whether to feel sorry or angry with Willie Jackson when he came to tell me about it, but I did say to him that it would cost the Labour Party, that if they withdrew from this, and it did. The next one. So the 2023 government, the current one we have, withdrew New Zealand's acceptance of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. It was a little bit shy at the beginning. I wouldn't say openly to the United Nations that it had actually done it, because that leaves it as the only country in the world who's done that. But they did. And then, of course, they launched sustained attacks on us to remove our rights and resources. And I saw a question there about the Regulatory Standards Bill. And I have to say that that Regulatory Standards Bill is much, much worse than the Treaty Principles Bill. And, you know, I encourage everybody to please put in a submission in opposition to the Regulatory Standards Bill. It's the Treaty Principles Bill applied far wider and far more devastating. Anyway, that's this government we've got. So the solution is constitutional transformation. And the reason that's a solution is because constitutions don't come out of governments. Constitutions come out of the people. And that's what's important. Okay, that's the next one down. Yeah, because it comes from the people, not from governments. Okay, so finally I get down to the report of Matike Mai about unraveling colonization. So this is our report of 2016. The next one. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is what we weren't asked to do, because people often assumed we were asked to do this. We were not asked to say how would the treaty fit into the current Westminster constitutional system we have in this country. We weren't asked to do that. Neither were we asked how might Māori representation be adequately addressed in the existing parliamentary framework. What we were asked to do was to seek advice on a different type of constitutionalism that is based on He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti. Because it was really, really clear to National Iwi Chairs Forum, this is who set up the working group, was National Iwi Chairs Forum, really clear that the Westminster constitutional system, as implemented since 1840, does not and cannot give effect to Te Tiriti or Waitangi. National Iwi Chairs Forum had spent 5 years trying desperately to talk to the government, to pati, to, you know, explain things diplomatically, clearly to the government on a number of major issues that were impacting on Māori. And we would get a certain way down the line and then we would just hit a brick wall because we were constitutionally powerless. And effectively, we were wasting our time trying to talk to them. And that's why National Iwi Chairs Forum was so determined that we had to do something to fix this up. So next one, please. So the work we've done to date, and you can see in the pānui that went out, 252 hui. Moana Jackson went to every single one of those hui. I went to about 50 of them. There were also 70 hui run by rangatahi. And what we did was we got university students in and wānanga students in to run these hui for rangatahi, because it's not my generation that's going to implement this stuff. It's the rangatahi. That's why they're important. We did interviews. We asked for written submissions at every hui we went to. We got thousands of them. We got input from many experts, and the report was adopted by National Iwi Chairs Forum and at the Waitangi Forum on the 6th of February 2016. Since then, we've had another, I lose count of how many hui there have been. There's been more than 200. And it's hui, conference presentations, wānanga around the country to take the report back to the people. We've had Māori constitutional conventions. They all had to be online between 2021 and 2024, so we had 4 in there. We had an international conference in 2022 where we called on Indigenous leaders throughout the world to come and tell us about their experiences of trying to do constitutional reform. And then we've had memorial conferences in honour of Moana Jackson 2023 and 2024. The report is now a required text in many university courses, not just in Māori studies, but it's in the law school, it's in sociology courses, it's in political studies courses, it's in anthropology courses. Many courses have these as prescribed texts. And constitutional transformation is initiated and driven by Māori whānau, hapu and iwi for the benefit and well-being of all people, and that's really important. And there has been widespread discussion and uptake, particularly amongst our people. But what we are wanting is input from all communities. This is not government initiated and will not be government determined. Next one, please. So the report itself was written for our whānau, hapu and iwi, and hopefully to help others to begin their conversation. And certainly that's when people have come and asked about this, I've always encouraged everyone, please read the report. Moana was the primary author of the report, and he has a beautiful writing style. So it is, well, hey, I say it's easy to read, but that's for you to decide whether it is or not. So there's 5 parts to it: the nature of constitution, the constitutional foundations, constitutional values, constitutional vision, and the recommendations. So let's have a look at each one of those. The nature of constitutions. Now, people are often told that you have to be a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer, or a legal academic to even understand what a constitution is. That is a load of rubbish, please. A constitution is about making decisions. Government is the process people use to regulate their affairs. A constitution is the code or set of rules to describe how government will function, who will make the rules, how to abide by them, and live together amicably. So constitutions are a set of rules. Now, constitutions are based on 2 things: the concept of power and the site of power. Now, the concept of power is the philosophy of constitutional authority and the values that underpin it, whereas the site of power is the institution or place where society decides where power is to be exercised and the limits it's going to place on those powers. Next one, please. Now, a constitution is a cultural creation. So anyone who tells you that, you know, it has to be this way, the constitution has to look like this, it can't look like anything else, rubbish. Constitutions come out of the cultures that create them. And so I've given you here a Western and a Māori concept and site of power so that you can see compare the two. The Western concept and site of power is hierarchical. The concept is sovereignty in Western constitutional thinking. Sovereignty, which is the most high and perpetual power over the citizens. The site of your constitution is the monarch in Parliament. And we see that in this country where King Charles, or he delegates his authority to the Governor-General, to Sindikiro. That is the monarch in Parliament who has absolute authority and dominion over the land and people. So very hierarchical. Whereas the Māori concept and site of power is quite different. It's the constitutional concept for Māori is mana. Mana, as I said before, absolute power and authority derived originally from the gods. The site of power is the ariki or the rangatira. So power is bestowed by the people to be exercised in a way that is tika, exercised in a way that is right and correct and proper within the culture. It makes decisions by consensus. It cares for the people. It keeps the people together, and it upholds the independence of hapu and iwi. Now, you can see by the Western and the Māori concept, they are just two totally different constitutional makeups. Okay. All right, the next one. Now, the constitutional foundations, they are, and I've already said this, tikanga, he Whakaputanga, Te Tiriti, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Now, all of these are framed within the right to self-determination, where everybody has a right, and it is a fundamental human right that you have to self-determination. We had a look and took advice from the Sami in Scandinavia. They have their own Sami parliament over there, and they gave us lots of advice. Moana spent a lot of time in Bolivia collecting information from there on what works and what doesn't work. And Native Americans as well, they have their own constitutional makeup within their so-called reservations, where they exercise their own sovereignty within those reservations. So those are the foundations that we have for this constitutional transformation. Next one, please. Now, the values. The constitutional values, this is what we spent the most time on in those 252 hui and the 70 rangatahi hui. What the people said was, I'm going to talk to you about models shortly, but they kept insisting that if you get the values right, the rest of it will fall into place. And the hui just concentrated on getting these values right. Now, in our huis, our people often talked about the words that you hear so frequently: mana, tapu, whakapapa, whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, all these Rangatiratanga, all these sorts of things, kaitiakitanga, that we hear all the time. But when we were writing the report, we were writing it for our people, but we wanted to include everybody else. So Moana went to a great deal of trouble to think about how best to express those constitutional values in English so that everybody could follow them. And he came up with 7. And as we've gone round afterwards, we keep asking, have we got the values right? And the response we have got is, yes, we pretty much did get it right. So, you know, that was a huge relief to us in Matike Mai Aotearoa. So the 7 values are, first of all, the value of place. To promote relationships with and to ensure the protection of papatua nuku our Mother Earth. And we certainly need to do it under this government. You know, I'm not quite sure why people don't understand. Some people don't understand that without Papa Tuanuku, we don't exist. The next one is the value of tikanga or law, to relate to or incorporate the core ideals and the ought to be of living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, in our hui that we went to, people would often say, yeah, we know what tikanga is, but you got to get real. Pākehā are never going to let us do that. And Moana was always very calm and saying to them, can we just put that thought to one side and let's think about what we ought to be doing in this country. What is the ideal for this country? And then we aim for the ideal and see how far we get. But we've got to set our sights on the ideal and what we ought to be doing. The value of community, to facilitate the fair representation and good relationships between all peoples. You'll recognise that as whanaungatanga. And to make sure that you do have communication, that you do have that feeling of community in the country that we just don't have. The value of belonging, to foster a sense of belonging for everyone in the community. The notion that people are marginalised. So many parts of our population are marginalised. And it's just, in terms of tikanga, that's just not on. You must bring everybody together. Next one, please. And then the three of them, the value of balance, to ensure respect for the authority of Rangatiratanga and Kāwanatanga. So respecting both. That's what Te Tiriti was about. Rangatiratanga has always been there. Kāwanatanga is coming in, and the treaty agreed that we would respect both. And that's what we need to ensure, that that balance of respecting both remains, but they'll do so within the different and the relational spheres of influence. Now, I'm going to talk to you about those when we get to the models. The value of conciliation, to have the underlying jurisdictional base and means of resolution to guarantee a conciliatory and consensual democracy. Now, this is something that, you know, it boggles my mind when I watch what goes on in Parliament, because what goes on in Parliament is this adversarial and majoritarian thing, and it goes on in a lot of places throughout the country where you've always got winners and losers. Now, if you're supposed to be there looking after the country and doing what's best for the country, shouldn't you be doing that by pooling all your expertise, your leadership qualities to do what is best for the country, and talking to each other, talking through it, and coming to agreement about what is best for the country, instead of having 51% saying this is how it'll be and 49% vehemently opposing it? That's a recipe for disharmony. Why would we do that? And yet we do. Okay. And the last value, the value of structure, to have structural conventions that promote basic democratic ideals of fair representation, openness, and transparency. And I want to come back to this democracy and the real meaning of democracy. Democracy is not one person, one vote, please. Democracy is about the people will decide. And it's the people, meaning everybody who wishes to have a say about the issue, is all included, that your representation that you send forward is able to represent you in fair representation, that you get to see what's going on. It's not done behind closed doors and all in secret. And in that way, it's also transparent, that you can see and understand what's going on. So those are the 7 values. And as I say, that was what Matike Mai Aotearoa, the working group, spent the most time on, was those values. Next one, please. So when it came to the models, we were asked to put up one model. Well, we couldn't do that, and we ended up with 6 models. But I'm going to just show you 3 of them. So how are you going to put this into practice and the structure for it? The first one I've got here is a tricameral model where you've got 3 parts to it. And this, by the way, comes out of the report of the Waitangi Tribunal in Te Paparahi o Te Raki. In 2014, their report on He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti was really, really helpful for our work because we were struggling as to know what to do. And then that report came out and it was really helpful. So you have what we call the Rangatiratanga sphere of influence. Now that's a sphere where Māori come together to make decisions on anything and everything to do with Māori people, Māori resources, and anything Māori. That's the Rangatiratanga sphere of influence. Then you have the Kāwanatanga sphere of influence, and that's where the Kāwanatanga, the Crown, makes its decisions for its people. And then where those two overlap, where what they're considering overlaps, you have a third sphere, and that's your tricameral thing. The third sphere is the relational sphere, where those two groups come together in a joint deliberative body to discuss and come to agreement about whatever it is that they need to talk about. So that's your tricameral model. The next one, please. Then there's a bicameral model where you just have the two, the Rangatiratanga sphere and the Kāwanatanga sphere. The Rangatiratanga sphere is the one that we spent time talking about. When we in the Matike Mai Aotearoa, we didn't talk about the Kāwanatanga sphere at all. And that's because it's not our place to talk about the Kāwanatanga sphere. That's for the Crown, that's for our visitors to talk about their space. But we were trying to sort out the Rangatiratanga sphere, our sphere. The next one, please. So quite logically, you could have a unicameral model. That's where you just have one sphere, the relational sphere, iwi, hapu, and the Crown all together and making decisions together. So that's the third possibility. All right, next one. Now the recommendations in the report that for 5 years, 2016 to 2021, there will be discussion amongst Māori. Then in 2021, we'd have a Māori Constitutional Convention, and we had that. It had to be online because of COVID. We would establish a working group to work out the structural and procedural issues for Māori, and we've just done that this year. Māori would initiate dialogue with other communities. Well, what happened there was other communities came to us. Almost as soon as we started, our whanaunga from the Pacific came and asked us to be included as well. We had approaches from Chinese communities, from Indian communities to please include them in it. And we said, can you please let us just sort it out amongst ourselves? We are the mana whenua. We are responsible for this country. Let us sort it out amongst ourselves first. And then we start talking to the other communities, which is what we've been doing for the last couple of years. Iwi, hapu, and lead Māori organisations are to initiate dialogue with the Crown. Yeah, right. Okay. So it's usually, it goes like this. Minister, whoever, we'd like to talk to you about constitutional transformation. Yes, well, the only one who has actually listened or tried to have anything about this, Nanaia Mahuta was good, but the one who surprised me was Jacinda Ardern. I gave her the report when she first became Prime Minister and said to her, please read it. She came back to me a few weeks later and said, Margaret, I've read it. And I went, wow. Couldn't quite believe it. But all she said to me was, there's a lot of work went into that report. And I said, yes, Jacinda, there was. And it is good for the country, but she made no comment. Ones in this government, I have said, you must read the report, have said to me things like, yes, well, it made my blood pressure go over the top. Yeah, they didn't want to know. And that's, I have to say, the approach that most of them have taken. 2021, we were to start organising a Tiriti convention for the country about constitutional transformation. That hasn't started yet. But the goal for constitutional transformation is 2040. Now, Moana was very clear about this. Constitutional transformation is not something you can rush. And the international conference that we had in 2022, when we invited Indigenous peoples from elsewhere to come, told us that very loudly and very clearly: do not rush constitutional transformation. You must take the people with you, and you talk for as long as you need to talk in order to bring everybody along. Okay, next one. So our discussions to date. Very quickly, people did not want the unicameral model. That's the one we've got already. No. The main discussion points. Now, the model that has been discussed is the tricameral body. I had expected that it would be the bicameral one, but it's not. It's a tricameral one. So it's still that our people want to be able to engage and talk with the kāwanatanga about what we're doing. Now, the kāwanatanga sphere would probably remain mostly as it is, although that is not for Māori to decide. That is for kāwanatanga and our visitors, our guests. That's for them to decide. So that would be your parliament, your courts, the rule of law, and so on. Would probably stay the same, except, and there's a big exception, it would have no say on anything Māori. That is solely the responsibility of the Rangatiratanga sphere. The Rangatiratanga sphere has existed for centuries in whānau, hapu, and marae. And when we're talking to our people, we just say to them, think about how you make decisions on your marae. Yeah, we know how to do that. Well, that's what you're looking at, written large across the whole country. And it will remain, because that is what we know. But colonization tried desperately to destroy that, and it has been damaged. So it does need strengthening, and it does need resourcing in order to empower Māori to give effect to tikanga and to restore the full power and authority of mana Māori motuhake. Tikanga must underpin the Māori-Crown relationship. Tikanga is the first law of this country, and it does include decision-making by consensus. I know that takes time, but I'd rather we took our time over decisions than watching what I watch now in Parliament, where you make a law and then, hello, shortly after, you're either repealing the law or you're amending the law or you're doing whatever. If you'd taken time at the beginning to make the decision, you get a much better decision out of it. The next one, please. Now, the main point, there is clear opposition to political parties in the Māori body. And this comes particularly from the Sami people, because it does not preserve the mana of the whānau and hapu. So you decide who your representative is going to be. You send them to represent you. If they are part of a party, then they no longer represent you, they represent your party. And so you've actually lost your representative. And Sami warned us that that can be very damaging. And I can see, well, we see it now. There's a clear need for a written constitution based on He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti. We are one of the few countries in the world that does not have a written constitution. And my students who come from the United States, we have a lot of students coming in from the United States, it just boggles their mind that there is not a written constitution in this country. There are increasing calls for constitutional transformation from Māori, especially since the 2023 election of that right-wing anti-Māori government that we have at the moment, with the Regulatory Standards Bill. Please, 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 please get some submissions on that. Some communities are getting on and exercising their own mana and not allowing kāwanatanga to have any say. And my own whānau and hapu of Te Whānau Moana up in the far north at Karikari, we've not only been doing it now, we've been doing it for the last 30 years. And I can tell you that the sky didn't fall in when we did that. We're actually fine. Okay. And the last points for the next slide. In 2024, we had national hui to develop the Rangatiratanga sphere. And we're doing that by through kotahitanga, just bringing everybody together, bringing the Māori world together. The first hui was at Tūranga Waiwai, called by Kingi Tūheitia. The second one was at Waitangi. The third one was at Omahu on Heretonga on the Hawke's Bay region. We were asked to go to the Four Winds, north, south, east, west. And the last one in Tuahiwi, just outside Christchurch. The working group has been established to make recommendations on the structural and procedural aspects, and it takes in people from a wide range of national groups, not just National Iwi Chairs Forum. There is growing support from non-Māori groups, but a very strong resistance from well-resourced right-wing interests urging the preservation of white supremacy in this country and the doctrine of discovery. But it's increasingly being countered by supportive Pākehā, and nowhere did we see that more clearly than in the hikoi in November last year, where it was just amazing to walk with so many Pākehā on that hikoi that I took part of it when it went over the harbour bridge. So, hoi anō taku kōrero. Sorry, I know I've probably gone over my 45 minutes, aroha mai, but koinei taku kōrero ngā mihi atu ki a koutou.
He mihi nui ki a koe, mai Margareta. That was amazing. We've got some pretty amazing pātai come up. Some of them are quite long. I'll start at the top and just clear off this question that was probably partially answered in your kōrero from Tony. One question I have concerns the status of He Whakaputanga. It was signed by few hapu in the north, and yet the narrative seems to want it included with the treaty as if they are one. I read somewhere that Busby did not have the authority to sign it on behalf of the Crown. Are either of these conjectures correct?
Yes, so as I said early on in the piece, Te Tiriti is an addendum to He Whakaputanga. So He Whakaputanga lay out the basic constitutional rules of the country. And then in order to accommodate our guests that were coming, we formally invited them in Te Tiriti. So Te Tiriti is part of He Whakaputanga. But as I explained, it's not widely known throughout the country. And that's one thing we noticed very clearly when we were going around the country with Matike Mai Aotearoa, that we would have to explain what He Whakaputanga is. And the usual response when we explained what He Whakaputanga is, yeah, well, okay, that makes sense. Oh, okay. So it's not that hapu and iwi around the country didn't want a bar of it. It's just they didn't know about it. That's all. And as I said, Busby was not a signatory to He Whakaputanga, so I'm not quite sure what's that about. He organised a whole lot of it, sure.
Kia ora, Margaret. The next two questions I'll read together from Agnes. Will constitutional transformation-based Te Tiriti strengthen Aotearoa's ability to maintain an independent foreign policy? And then I'm looking for extra reasons to motivate people to make submissions against the Regulatory Standards Bill and any legislation undermining Te Tiriti. Will the Indigenous rights of Māori guaranteed under Te Tiriti and the UN Declaration have an impact in preventing Aotearoa from becoming enmeshed in the developing power struggle in the Pacific between the USA and China? And they're kind of two different questions now that I properly read them.
Okay, so under constitutional transformation, it will no longer be that you have a very select group, and particularly the ones you've got at the moment who seem to be very wedded to the thinking of the Atlas Network, and having big corporations just come in and control the country and therefore drag you into that sort of foreign policy quagmire that's out there at the moment. What is envisaged, and this is why we need to talk about it so much, is that all peoples in this country will decide how we are going to communicate with the rest of the world. And I would have thought that our people were more concerned about keeping us all together and then developing relationships that are of benefit to the whole of the country. And that's why the vision of Matike Mai Aotearoa is for all people to be making decisions, not just a select few wealthy corporate interests. And certainly in terms of the Regulatory Standards Bill, yes, I mean, the Regulatory Standards Bill is about normalising ACT ideology about corporations and wealthy people having complete control over the country and free to exploit anything and everything and to drag us into whatever foreign policy they think will benefit them monetarily and anything else. So absolutely.
So just also a little bit further down the list, Kristen Joy, wouldn't the kāwana sphere automatically include all Māori people too, being part of deciding things outside of Māori things, because they are still part of everything else as well, and most have European ancestry too? Surely Māori have the right to say and contribute within both spheres.
So this is a question that was actually asked the other way around, whether Pākehā could go into the Rangatiratanga sphere, and it was one of the questions I got asked in one of the early wānanga and conferences that I was asking. And I didn't know the answer straight off, and off I went back to Moana, and Moana said, you can decide where you want to go. If you want to go into the Rangatiratanga sphere, then you know that you're in that system where the law is tikanga and you abide by that. You want to be in the kāwanatanga sphere, that's up to you. Now, the thing about whether you can step between the two of them, well, that's actually what we do at the moment, is we step between the two of them. But, and that's something, that's part of the discussion we need to have. I don't think it would be right to say, no, you can't be part of this one and you must only be part of that one. That's not how it's envisaged. It's just you have two quite separate legal constructs, and this is not unusual. David Seymour will tell you that no country in the world operates with more than one legal system. That's a load of rubbish. There are plenty of plurinational countries. You just look at the United States. The United States has a whole lot of American Indian sovereign nations right the way throughout their states who function within, they do function within the federal ones, but the states cannot interfere with them. So there are these two systems that you would have, and you can operate with, you need to know both of them if you want to operate in both of them, which is what we do now. If people want to stay just in the Rangatiratanga sphere, well, a lot of our people do just stay in the Rangatiratanga sphere. A whole lot of people just stay in the kāwanatanga sphere, but you're always going to have those who can hop between the two of them as well.
Kia ora, Margaret. This is another question that's generated a lot of interest from people. So it's from Lisa. Any leads for non-Māori constitutional folk to help us with the kāwanatanga sphere? And what range of skills are useful? I'm part of the sphere and pretty keen to ditch Westminster. I know artists who have great skills and maybe need a couple of lawyers and politics knowledge, etc. So,
oh, what a lovely question. Well, I did say to you that it's not for Māori to decide what the kāwanatanga sphere does or how it's made up of, but it is something that Moana came across this when he was asked to go and talk to a Rotary group. I remember he rang me about this. It was somewhere down in Wellington. He was asked to go, and he rang me and asked me if I would come and talk to them. And I said, no, I don't want to. And off he went, and he talked to them. And he was really quite surprised, because what they said to him was, we can see that the parliamentary system we've got is not operating the way it should do. We can see that there are all sorts of problems, there are all sorts of people who are marginalised, that it's just not functioning the way it should be. And they actually asked for advice on what do we do to sort it out. Now, this is why we need to have that whole constitutional convention, because while we have Matike Mai Aotearoa concentrated on the Rangatiratanga sphere and concentrated on what we as the Indigenous people of this country are bound to do, we have this responsibility where we have to look after the country. What I would say to the Kāwanatanga sphere is, I would encourage you to have a look at what your system looks like. And does it really operate properly for you? And I don't think it necessarily has to be lawyers or politics, the politics knowledge to do this. This is about what is right and what is good for the people. And in my observation, some of our most amazing thinkers are our artists. Our artists can capture things in a way that just explains things so clearly. But please don't leave it just to lawyers or politicians. It's the people who need to decide. It's the people who need to talk about this. And that's why I was saying constitutional reform has to come out of the people. But you need it. I can't emphasize enough the need to take everybody with you. We are used to this in the Māori world, where, Pākehā institutions like district councils and that pull their hair out with us because we take so long to do things. But it's deliberate. It's deliberate because we're slow and careful and take the people with you. And we know what happens if you rush a decision. For sure, it's going to fall over. So this is why I really ask you, in the Kāwanatanga sphere, take a careful look at what is there and start having a discussion about how you can improve it so that it does actually look after the people properly. Yeah.
Kia ora, Margaret. That's such great wisdom at this particular time with so many things being rushed through. Here's another question from Michael. What can we as non-Māori do to support this amongst the spheres of influence we are engaged in? And is there one or two things that we can do to ensure this remains a Māori-led initiative? And this, I presume he means Matike Mai.
So really the request for us to sit down and think about the rules under which decisions are made is the most important thing. And remembering that in particular for this country, we don't actually have a written constitution. Mm-hmm. Although, while I say that, I then say to myself, don't say that. There is a written constitution for this country, and I get this whenever I go home. If I say to them, oh, well, there's no written constitution in this country. Yes, there is. He Whakaputanga me Te Tiriti. Okay, yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti are historically, morally, the written constitution of this country, but it is rejected by the Crown or those who act on behalf of the Crown in this country. So if that, you're never going to get away from the fact that those are the founding documents of this country. You're never going to get away from that. But if you need to have something that ensures that everyone is feeling comfortable with it, for heaven's sake, have the discussion. Talk about what would be, and this is what we did in Matike Mai Aotearoa. We went out and asked a simple question. Your question would probably be different from the one we asked. Our question was, if tomorrow you could make your own decision for your own life, what would it look like? How would you go about doing that? And then just ask people to do that, because in the Māori world, we're not allowed to make decisions for ourselves under this Westminster system. we have to actually remove ourselves from the Westminster system in order to make our own decisions, and that's what my whānau and hapu does. We just remove ourselves and do it anyway. But we know that across the country, most of our people don't have the luxury of being able to say, no, I don't want to know about you, kāwanatanga, and all your rules and whatever you are. I'm going to live by my own. In the kāwanatanga sphere, I would ask you to have a discussion about the fact that it's a really simple one. And I remember when I first said this publicly, I just got absolutely slaughtered for saying it. But this is a Māori country. And I would have thought that people would be proud of the fact that this is a Māori country, and yet they get horribly offended by it. Why? It is who was here when you came, and it is who invited people to come here in the first place. Yeah, I know we got overrun. Yeah, I know they tried to say that we don't exist anymore. I know that. But the thing is, we've never gone away. So what I'm asking you to do is to have a conversation that says, yes, here are our Māori people. We know that they're here. They're asking us to talk about what is best for the country, for all of the country, and that Māori have a responsibility. You don't need to be scared, and to give them back the confidence to be able to say, please do not be scared of Māori. We're here to look after you. That's that manaakitanga. We must look after our guests, but we do ask you to please, one, acknowledge that this is a Māori country and the sky will not fall in if you do acknowledge it's a Māori country. And two, how can we work together to do things in a way that does see that vision of the treaty being enacted actually happen in a way that ensures that everybody prospers? I can't understand what's wrong with that, other than that there are those who are greedy, who want only them to have it and nobody else. Well, that's not for the good of the country. What we need is what is good for the country, for everybody. Okay? But I really want Pākehā, please have the discussion, have the debate, and take your time over it. And I think the other thing I would ask too is, can we all please listen to each other? When we have something to say, please listen to each other.
Kia ora whaia. We're not going to get through all the questions, but this one I think is probably a good one to ask you. From Nick, do you have any thoughts on recent work to constitutionally transform Western worldviews, such as work towards a UN declaration on the rights of Mother Earth, Mother Nature, Mother Earth, that could radically shift the value base of the kāwanatanga sphere and make a closer alignment or overlap of these spheres possible?
I wasn't aware that there was going to be a UN declaration on the rights of Mother Earth, but by crikey would I took all that. And it's what you'll hear coming out of Indigenous peoples right the way around the world, is just absolute, the need to protect the very essence of what the planet is. And without that, as I said, none of us will exist. And there are those who have, people who have been very involved in a lot of the climate change work, who have said, please let Indigenous people lead this stuff, because Indigenous people have always stayed very close to the Mother Earth and always monitored her very, very closely. And I think some of where you've got industrialization and that sort of thing in the Western world have in some ways lost touch with the Mother Earth. So, if that is what is going on, that I have to say that the protection of Mother Earth was one of the key things of Papatūānuku came up every time in every one of our hui, was the need to do that. But it's also in the Bolivian constitution as well, the first law in the Bolivian constitution is the protection and the looking after of Pachamama. Pachamama is the equivalent of Papatūānuku. And that was their prime law. So, oh gosh, yes, we really need to shift that that thinking to make sure. The idea of having the overlap of the spheres or a greater alignment, oh, we'd love that. We'd absolutely love that, because remember, we invited people to come in to become part of us. But because we've been totally marginalized and oppressed, we have to withdraw ourselves in order to re-strengthen who we are and what we are and try and heal ourselves. But the whole idea when we invited you in was that you come and live with us and live with us in peace. And that's certainly what I'd love to see. Hey, look at me. My mother's Scottish. My father's Māori. I'm the living essence of it. There's heaps of us like this. Okay? We'd love to see it all in harmony.
Kia ora whaia. Just a question here from Gemma. Tēnā koe Margaret he pātai tāku. I'm struggling to understand how iwi and hapu can have rangatiratanga over themselves when every decision the Crown makes, or so it seems to me, has an impact on Māori.
Oh, well, my answer to that one is come up home to Karikari and I'll show you. It does, and what we did at Karikari, it was our kaumātua actually, who said to us when we were struggling with exactly this, the oppression of the Crown over the rates. They were threatening to take our land. We have very little land left. And they were threatening to take what tiny bit of land we had left off us. And we end up fighting amongst ourselves over it, over who hasn't paid the rates, and none of us can afford it, and all this sort of thing. And the kaumātua at one stage said to us, why do you even bother with the Pākehā and what he's telling you you have to do? Just forget it. You know who you are on this land. You know how you came to be on this land, and you know how to live on this land. Just get on and be who you are. And then it did help that the Māori Land Court then told the Manganui County Council, leave these people alone. They're not doing any harm and you don't give them any services anyway, just let them be. And so we did. And we have, out home there, lived under tikanga for the past 30 years. And there are now, before they used to tell us we couldn't live on our own land, only one house on 200 acres. There are now 50 houses on there. None of them have resource consents. And we live there under our own Rangatiratanga. And as I said before, the sky did not fall in. And the people who are the happiest about this, I have to say, are the police. Because the police, we did say to the police, do not come out unless we ask you. Leave it to us, we'll sort out all of our problems. And that's exactly what we do. If there are problems out home, we sort it out amongst ourselves. Hey, do we have arguments amongst ourselves? Hell yeah. That's just the way whānau are. But we sort it out ourselves. And we take responsibility for ourselves. And nobody but nobody of a Pākehā organisation comes out there to Karikari and tells us what to do. Because if they try, we just say, go, leave us alone. We'll sort ourselves out. So yes, you can. Gemma, you can do it. We do it in Te Whānau Moana. And I do see this starting to happen more and more around the country, where you just make the decision to take control back of your own lives. Okay? And don't pay our rates.
Kia ora, Margaret. That's actually probably quite a lovely note to finish on. There are a lot of more things in the Q&A. A lot of them are just ngā mihi nui ki a koe whaia, and thank you for your wisdom. I will save the Q&A, so maybe there'll be an opportunity for us to look through them and maybe think of our next webinar or educational offering that we might do. But I'll pass us on to Moya now to close up the session, and thank you all for your partai, and I'll pass on to Moya now.
Kia ora. Kia ora, whaia. Yeah, I suppose on reflection that the challenge has been laid down to us by you in the Kāwanatanga sphere to sort ourselves out. I'm just thinking how lucky the Rangatiratanga sphere is to have had yourself and Moana lead that process. And I'm wondering who will be the leaders of our process. And I guess I used to think that it was perhaps the instigation of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into Constitutional Transformation. But I think after hearing you tonight that there may be some fishhooks in that approach of starting the ball rolling with a Royal Commission. Be interested to hear your views on that. The only alternative that I guess that I can see is perhaps the leadership from the third sector, the NGO sector, to initiate what you're talking about, a constitutional convention. So, yeah, just if you have any thoughts about that.
Again, very reluctant to tell the Kāwanatanga sphere what it should do. And it is a matter of having to really think hard amongst yourselves as to what it is that you actually value in your culture. I was brought up in both cultures. I have huge respect and love for a lot of Pākehā culture, English and Scottish culture. Yeah, the two of them conflict at times, but there was a lot in there that I really, really value and still value to this day. That's what helped us when we were doing the Matike Mai Aotearoa stuff, was going back to what we value. And therefore, thinking from that space now, how do we make sure that those values hold? What processes do we need and what decision-making processes do we need to make sure that those values will continue to hold? So, and then as to who does it within your sphere, I don't know. See, that's where I want to say, just talk to the people. Talk to the people. But that's a lot harder for you guys than it is for us to talk to the people. How do you get the people to actually talk? I don't know that I have an answer for that, Moya, within the Pākehā world.
Do you have any reservations about a push for a Royal Commission? Do you think that would have too many fishhooks?
Royal Commissions are set up by governments. You shouldn't have something that's set up by governments. What I'm really interested in at the moment is, you notice what Marilyn Waring has done, where they, over the pay equity thing, where she just called together a group and said, we'll set up our own thing. That's the sort of thing where, it's not politicians, it's not lawyers, it's not governments doing it, but it's people who can reach the people.
Okay.
And, good, experienced people on how to communicate with people. You've got them out there. You've got heaps of them.
Yes, of course we have. We've got heaps of them. Well, kia ora koutou, and for everybody participating, and amazing questions that have come in. And tēnā koe, Margaret, for the time and energy that you have always are willing to put into this mahi. It's absolutely, imperative that we change Westminster. It's ridiculous, the left, right, left, right, left, right. 51%. It's a madness, and I think the more Pākehā I speak to anyway, certainly want to change, because we can see we can't make mokopuna decisions. We can't deal with climate change when we're just going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. So Tiriti-based constitutional change, in my view, is of course the only way forward, that we can have some sort of foundational solidity based on tikanga and shared values. So I'll pass on to Tim now to end our session tonight, and to farewell us. Kia ora, Tim.
Kia ora mai tātou. Kia ora mai Mākere. Kia koutou katoa. I'm just thinking of the value of balance, harmony, those things that you were putting right at the centre there. And so Karaki is hopefully picking up something of that spirit. Whakamawa te kōrero, whakamawa te wānanga, whakamawa kia ranginui e tui hua nei, whakamawa kia papato nuku takura ake nei, whakatina ki te tumu te maramatanga, whakatina kia tina, haumi e, hui e, tā ki e.